Hello everyone. In today's video, we're going to be looking at, listening to, and exploring the Phase 4. This was actually the last video I ever made on my old system before that completely blew up. So we're picking up where we left off. Obviously, the program has come a long, long way since then with lots of new features, but for the most part, this instrument seems the same. The one thing I noticed that did change is that instead of having our voicing options up here, we actually now go into the inspector panel and then we have our stack spread and some of our voicing options in here. The other cool thing is that we now have this show help button, which from looking at this and kind of messing around, it goes to show that I'm not really needed anymore. It really does a great job of explaining what everything does. Of course, you'll want to go in there and play with it yourself, but this is a great idea and I'm really zoomed in. That's the reason why we can't read everything. But if we were to zoom out, and of course that's what you would do on your own system, you'll be able to see everything very easily. But without further ado, let's go ahead and get into it. The first half will be actually working with the instrument and understanding all the features. And then the second half will be just kind of talking about where this instrument exists in relationship to other instruments on the market that do something similar, and my overall thoughts about the Phase 4. And spoiler alert, it really is fantastic, if I do say so myself. So I've actually already done the first thing, the first step, anytime I open up a new synthesizer, and that's to bring it back to as pure of an initialized state as I can. And we can see we have this sine wave here, we have a gate message here. Nothing is impacting this sound in any way. All we have is this red sound generator turned on, and we can hear that we have a sine wave outputting. Let's go ahead into the presets and let's pick something like a bass. Usually a bass is pretty simple. Let's see if we can find something easy in here. I haven't done this in advance. Let's choose fat bass. Let's hear what it sounds like. Okay, this should be a pretty easy sound for us to pull back and get to an initialized state. And when I bring this up, the first thing we see is that we have the remote controls up and already routed to stuff, which in all honesty, I'm not going to mess with that at this point because, there's no reason to pull that stuff back. We could always go and reset this stuff later on, but I'm just going to go ahead and close those up. And what I want to do next is bring up the modulators. And as you can see, there actually are no modulators being used at all. So that makes our life very easy. If I look at the sound, and whenever I kind of am dissecting a synthesizer, I want to go the opposite way for the signal flow. So typically the signal flow is going left to right, which means when I break this down, I want to go right to left. All right, so start all the way at the final output and start pulling that stuff back and back and back until we just end up here. So I can see that there's an effect in here. There's a distortion. So let's just go ahead and delete the distortion. Let's hear what it was before and then what it is after. Mostly that was just bringing in some additional volume. And I can see I have volume controls here. And one thing I know about this instrument already is that if we think about the signal flow, okay, you can almost imagine that this is the amp on the Phase 4. Okay, this is more just like a mixer. Okay, this is more just like if this was plugged into a mixer, this would kind of be the fader there. This is the amp on the instrument itself. And I'm going to turn this way down so I can demonstrate. When I bring this in, this is going to correspond to the output here. So right now it's still very quiet. Okay, it's not actually distorting, but if I was to go in and increase the drive here, which is happening before the filter, okay, so don't worry about this too much right now. You can see that that square wave up there at the start is an indicator that we are distorting. And if I keep bringing it up, we can keep it distorted the whole time. That's not something that I want, okay? I want this sound to be pure. I don't want to be squaring anything out. So I'm going to go and I'm going to pull that back, and I want to be at 0. I'll bring our regular output back to its default, which is -6. That was very loud. Apologies. And I'll bring this drive control back to its default, which is like -6. Okay, so now we're good with those outputs, but what else is impacting the sound? In here, we have a filter. And we can hear that impact, traditional low-pass filter here. If I click this button, that's going to turn the filter off entirely. So now let's listen to the sound. And we are now just getting the sound of these 4 guys in whatever combination they're set up in, and that's the output, okay, like so. Nice and simple. We have a filter envelope, and if I right click it, or if I click it, let's actually bring up the inspector just to be sure. All right, let's see if this is actually going to anything. It shouldn't be going to anything because I would see underneath it if it was. So this filter envelope is actually not going anywhere, but I'm going to go ahead and I'm just going to do a classic gate message regardless, just to be on the safe side. And I'm going to do the same thing with the amplitude envelope. Now, back in the day, understanding the ADSR was very complicated. Now we have a great little visual representation of it. And I want to make a gate message, which just means when I press, the sound comes on. When I let go, the sound goes off. The fact that this sustain is at 100% basically means we're already there. There's a tiny release that I can see. That's mostly just to prevent clicks. And there you go. We have our standard ADSR. All right, so we're getting closer here. Let's move over now, and we have our different sound generators, and let's see how these are impacting the sound. So right now, the only thing that appears to be on is this red one here. And to be honest, just from looking at this, I'm not sure what, if anything, is impacting that sound. Let's turn off the M and see if it changes the sound. Nope. Let's turn off the Y, see if it changes the sound. Nope. Let's turn off the B, see if that changes the sound. Nope. And then we can turn off the red, and then we have no sound at all, okay? So these are our sound generators. Let's bring the red one back on and try to understand what the tone is and why it's doing what it's doing. So right now, the sound appears to be in stereo, okay? And I can see that there's this little icon here that corresponds to stereo detuning. It's currently turned on. Let's turn that off. Okay, so now we just have mono, just one channel. And now we're just getting basically a sawtooth wave, okay? And if I go in, I can see none of these are turned on. Let's see if I do the mod, if anything's gonna change. I already know it's not. Okay, let's bring back to whatever its default state is, which is 100%. Let's bring this back down to 0. Let's not offset anything. Let's keep it as still as we can. And then the last thing we can do is we can play around with this shape here. So right now we're getting a sawtooth wave. If I bring that all the way back, we get a sine wave, and this would be kind of a true, initialized default state. Now, the ratio here is 1:2, so it's actually 1 octave lower than it would be if we were at 1:1, and that's only really important if you're following along with the key tracking. So now if we hit A4, we'd be hearing an A4 440 hertz. And there you have it. That is how to take any sound. You could have done anything really complicated if you want to. You would follow those exact same steps, and you'd be left with a default state. Remember that inside Bitwig Studio, you can save anything as your default preset or just as a regular preset. If you right click, you can choose save as default preset. I've actually made a different default preset. It's very similar, just slightly different, that I'm going to load up here for the purposes of this video just to make things go faster. And what we're going to start with is just one of these guys, one of these sound generators. I can see there are 4, and they appear to be, and they are, completely identical. So that's telling me, as somebody who's worked with a lot of synthesizers before, that these somehow will impact each other if we want them to. If we don't want them to, we could operate this as just a traditional subtractive synthesizer, bring all of these in, change the shape of the waveform, use our filter to carve it out. But I'm sure that there's a lot more fun we can have if we do mix and match and have these guys impact one another. But let's start with just one, and we have our traditional sine wave here. And the first thing we come across is the phase. The phase is telling us where the waveform starts, where the waveform finishes. In isolation, all this is really going to do is add a clicking sound. When we're at 0, it's starting on 0, so we don't really hear anything. It starts and finishes on 0. It's starting at a 0 amplitude. If we bring this up, the amplitude is actually already starting. We start to hear a little bit of a click because of the attack and release, but not that exciting for our purposes here. Just so you guys can get an idea, this would be 0, 90, 180, 270, 360, and you can either speed this up or you can bring it back if you want to. With any sound that you make, where let's say we bring in another one of these guys and we totally make these identical, right now the expectation as I bring the volume in is just that this is going to get louder. And it could get so loud that we're distorting, but that has nothing to do with the relationship between these two. It has everything to do with the relationship of the output stage, and then that's actually what's causing that distortion to occur. So it's important that you understand your signal flow. You understand why the sound is changing, because it's easy to get confused sometimes, and that's one of them right there, especially if you're working at really high levels all the time. Now, if I go in here and I adjust this phase, we're going to start to hear something's changing. And what's going to be changing is just the amplitude. Okay, if we get all the way to 180, it's going to cancel out entirely. Okay, I'm hitting the note, but we're not hearing anything at all. That's because we're perfectly out of phase. At every point along this waveform, this one is canceling it out. Now, the minute I start to change anything about this, any parameter on it, we will start to bring some sound back. Okay, because now that information is different along this waveform at every point, so we're starting to hear things. It's very funny, though, and interesting that there are still points where it may cancel itself out a little bit more than others. All right, but we are jumping ahead of ourselves a little bit. Remember that there's nothing technically modulating these two. This is just the relationship of these two guys in terms of what gets spit out over here. Okay, that's the relationship of these two. So let's go ahead, let's bring this back. Let's just turn these guys off for right now so we don't get confused, but that's your phase relationship right there. The next thing that we come across on the top anyway is our key tracking option. And I guess let's do ratio as well. So like I talked about before, let's say that I'm playing A4, okay, which I think this is A4. Some of you guys with perfect pitch might tell me it's not. I think this is A4, which is spitting out at 440 hertz. Now, if I hit the ratio and I take this to 1 to 2, this is essentially dividing that frequency. This is our starting point, 1 divided by 2. That brings us down to 220. Okay, if I go to 4, that would be like 110. Okay, and I can't do the other math in my head. The typical rule of thumb is the more crazy and complicated this is, the less it becomes like the starting point that you're at. When we're at 1 to 1 and we're key tracking and we don't adjust this like pitch offset, we're just playing the keyboard like we normally would, okay? It's a sine wave, but it's just playing out the pitch that you're expecting it to. If we go in here, and this is something that I think people get confused about sometimes, if we go in here and we like bring this up by 1, for example, when I'm playing my A4, it's actually going to be spitting out a B4 or whatever, an A sharp. It does whatever, you get the idea, right? You get what I'm saying. So we don't want that. Now, when we're modulating and stuff like that, we may want to mess with it. But that is kind of like your starting pitch. This also impacts your starting pitch. When you put those into combination and you're not sure what you're doing, you can get yourself into trouble and you can make an instrument that's not like a traditional Western harmonically tuned instrument. And that's what you want to watch out for. So whatever's actually outputting sound, make sure you know what that starting pitch is. Like, it's fine for me to go up 12, down 12. It's fine for me to go 2 to 1, 1 to 4, 1 to 8, whatever, as long as I know that I'm sticking with the pitch that I'm expecting. So a lot of times you might go in here and let's say that we wanted to like basically make a chord. All right, we could do that in a couple ways. We could do that with ratios. We could do some things like, let's say we go 4 to 3. Let's get something that sounds a little more interesting. And then let's take this ratio and let's just go 2 to 1. And let's actually make this a saw 2 just to be on the safe side. Now these guys, because we're in our key tracking mode, they're all moving up and down together. It's not that exciting, but you get the idea, okay? Alternatively, we could go in there and we could mess with the steps. So we could bring this one back to 1 to 1. And then this time, let's like just bring this up by 3, which is a minor third. And let's try to get as close to 3 as possible. It can be fun to actually pull it off just a little bit. It adds a little more excitement to the sound, a little more, or a little less predictability. These are all still moving together though. Now, if I go in and I turn this off, I turn key tracking off, now what I'm actually doing is I'm just spitting out hertz. And here's again where ratio is going to impact this. So now if I go 2 to 1, where I start going further and further up here, let's actually just turn this off just so we can hear what's happening. Let's bring this up to like 50 to 1 at this point. Okay, that's kind of crazy. I'm hitting different keys, but we are not changing the pitch in any way, shape, or form. Sometimes what's happening is that phase is going and starting on different places, and that's why we see it flinging around and going all crazy, but it's the exact same pitch, or frequency, I should say, regardless of what I hit, all right? And I could go back in there and we could go, you know, let's bring this up to like 100, something that starts as a audible frequency. And there's your true 100, there's your 200, 300, 400, 500, 600, like so. Now when we bring this back in with our red and our yellow, let's bring that 100 just keeps droning on. So depending on what note you hit, there are times where that sounds okay, and then there's times where it sounds really weird. So for experimental purposes, something like this is great. But typically, again, depending on the sort of sound you're making, you may not want to be playing around with that stuff too much. It's okay to play with ratio. It's okay to play with the steps, as long as you actually know what you're doing, what will work, what won't work. And that's why even a cursory knowledge of music theory can be useful when you're doing synthesis, okay? Because that actually kind of plays in here. All right, so let's turn these other two off. We only have one other thing to look at, and that is going to be our stereo detune, which we already got a chance to play with a little bit earlier. So right now, both the left and the right channel are spitting out exactly the same thing. I can go in and I can then stereo detune it, and as long as I change this hertz value, the left and the right channel are actually going to be different. We're going to detune the two of them. And you can hear we get that kind of Hassing stereo type effect. If we go too far, it doesn't sound all that good. Again, in experimental uses, it's great. And then we might as well just go ahead and look at the voicing options. Again, you have to go into the inspector panel, and we can do a little bit of voice stacking here, which is just going to end up making this louder. You can see right now, it's only one voice, or if I overlap, we see multiple. Like so. Now I can go back in and I can voice stack here. So now we actually, when I'm hitting one key, it's actually putting a duplicate on top. You can tell I'm just using my computer keyboard here. Let's do 3. And then it makes 3. And one of the things we can do is we can use the voice stack spread to make things even a little bit more interesting. So it's going to take those 3 duplicates of the signal and spread them out even a little bit further. You can hear how some parts are getting really low and some are getting really high. And there used to be a lot of options for this, and I'm not sure if they took that away or if it ends up somewhere else, but that actually used to be something you could do more with that I've noticed is gone, and I guess they just found there weren't a lot of uses for it, or maybe it's somewhere else. No big deal, though. Let's bring that back down to no voice stacking for now, just to make our life a little bit easier. And the way that you bring this instrument into mono is that you do want to come all the way down here to 0, and then you can do and mess with your legato and your glide and things like that I'm sure you guys have done before. You can still voice stack these guys, but it is just going to be inputting one note at a time. So You can hear I'm playing over. We've messed with those different settings before. We're not going to do that in this video because it's not really relevant or specific to the Phase 4. This is true in all of the Bitwig instruments. Okay, we'll bring that back up just so we can do overlapping notes if we want to. Depending on the sound you're making, you may want to keep that in mono or not. Now we actually get to the fun part, and that is adjusting the shape, the mod, and kind of starting to understand what this grid does. To begin, we'll just work with our red output here. Everything else we're going to leave off. So the first thing is, if you want some diversity in your sounds, you want to make things interesting, you have this shape control along with this algorithm control, which is going to start you at different points. So right now we have our saw wave selected, our saw algorithm. At the bottom, we just get a sine. As we go up, we create something a little bit closer to a pure sawtooth wave in there. We can go and check out this pulse width one, and you can see it's reducing that duty cycle until you get right on top of each other. There are a lot of experimental uses for this instrument, as you can hear. When it gets to something that sounds unpleasant to you, you're probably not going to be using it when you're doing traditional instruments, but experimental stuff, do whatever you want. We have this half option. It's just nice to have the variety. We have this double option. And then we have sine, which is cool. It just kind of like really adjust, again, the duty cycle of that sine wave till you get some really crazy and sharp stuff. Okay, but that's that, and there really is a ton in there if you want it. The next thing we have is the formant control, which really is just adding like peaks. It's making the sound more complicated. It's giving you a broader range of harmonics and partials to, again, if you wanted to go more in your traditional subtractive sense, start to pull out with filters later on. So there's a lot of options in here. And remember, everything can be modulated, so you don't have to use this grid if you don't want to. You can just modulate shape, and really that might be enough to make super complex sounds if you stack some of these guys on top of each other. So we're back to our sine wave, and now let's actually go ahead and double click on this. This allows us to actually modulate what's happening inside this sound source. And right now, because everything else is turned off, the only thing that would make sense is to use this red one, which is kind of like a self-modulation. So the fact that we're like spitting out, let's say at 440 in a sine wave, that means when we kind of self-modulate this one, red on red, if you will, that's what's going to have the impact. It's easy to take this to extremes, and we'll get into it, but there are ways to temper this back. For now, let's not worry about the global one. Let's just stick in here. This has gotten out of control. I can pull this back from here. I can pull it back from in here. Okay, and there's a lot of just kind of fine tuning and playing with these things with all four of these guys to get interesting sounding results. So let's go back. Let's bring that back down to 0. And that's really the basis of this instrument. And I think what it comes down to in sound design, this is like, your tip of the day. When you're trying to understand an instrument, you're just trying to figure out how the controls impact the sound over time, and how you can like take that further, how you can use envelopes, LFOs, other things to change it over time. Right now, everything we're doing is purely static. We're just adjusting that final output by mixing and matching or changing settings, but you can always take that further using envelopes, using LFOs, using any kind of modulator, and that is where Bitwig Studio is so powerful. So that's kind of the spoiler to this whole video here, because we're not going to be taking it that far. I just want you guys to understand how things are interacting. So let's go ahead, let's bring B back in. Okay, I'm going to turn modulation all the way off on this. We'll see if this actually works. So this is no longer turned on, but the red modulation amount is on, and this blue guy is now on. Is this going to have any impact? Let's see. So I want to go blue impacting red, and it will work. Okay, this is important to understand, to know what you need to have turned on and what doesn't need to be turned on. So in this case, you can see this is as complicated as we can go. And let's just go ahead. Let's put that on 100%. Why not? Now, when we go in and we start adjusting and changing things, we can get different results. Subtle things like messing with the phase, or more obvious things like messing with the shape and the formants. Let's adjust this one. That has a big impact. So that's a cool sound. And what we could do is we could get rid of this for here, and then if we want to add something interesting to the sound, we could actually apply one of these envelopes. Okay, so let's use this one. Again, I like to just call this the F envelope, okay? By default, it is going to be, if we turn the filter on, you can immediately set like, you know, an amount to the filter frequency, but we don't have to, right? I can just use this F envelope here. All right, and let's see what we get. Maybe I'll use a little bit on that shape too, so we get a really strong hit. So we got a little bass going. And then if we adjust the amplitude envelope, again, this by default will be set to our amplitude envelope. Let's go. And part of the reason, and this is a common synthesizer thing sometimes people get stuck on, if I'm bringing the release up of the amplitude envelope, a lot of times I want to match that with the filter. Very interesting sound. And because those release times are different, you get that weird kind of like vibraty sound at a certain point. I actually like it that way better. I wonder what this one sounds like on its own. That adds a little bit of an interesting texture. And now let's take this really out of control here. And if I want to do the opposite, I can actually have the red influence the shape of the blue, which then influences back to the red. So this is what's so fun about it. So let's bring the mod up here. Right now it's going to do nothing. Let's bring it to 100. Let's keep it normal. Well, actually, let's go above and beyond because I want to show you guys the global controls. And then I'm going to start to bring a little bit of red in. And you can hear how quickly it's taking it out of control. Now, you might like this sound, you might not, doesn't matter. What we can do is we can actually go into these global controls. I really love this. I love the fact that you can go crazy and then you can pull it back at any time. This is an amazing feature. Inside of other FM synthesizers, PM synthesizers, whatever, sometimes it's very frustrating because you go too far and then there's no easy way to kind of pull it back. You just give up. Here, if I pull back on the mod, that's bringing the mod back on all of these guys. And we've already smoothed it out. Same thing would be true with shape. And then it's really up to you on how you combine all this stuff. We still have 2 more we can play with. And if we want, we can bring some of these in and just add like an overtone on top or something. We don't always have to go in and go crazy with the modulators. So let's just hear what this one sounds like. This is just bringing us something on top. And I kind of like that as it is. And this is where I might voice stack it up, just to get interesting. That's a little too far. Let's do that. I'm interested to see what effect this is gonna have. This may not be a good effect, but I'm just curious. And this is always what Bitwig Studio encourages you to do. Like, sometimes it makes a difference and sometimes it doesn't. And I don't really care why or why not. Let's bring that back to 0. And then maybe on the bottom, I just want like a sub-octave playing, okay? So I could just go in here and let's bring this ratio from up to 1 to 2. And again, I might actually just have a little bit of the purple. Let's bring it up 1 octave. Add a little ripple. And I could obviously go and mix this and make it sound better, but let's try going +7 here. I'm just interested. And one thing I would maybe typically do might be to fade this one in slowly over time. Let's get to a better octave. And I would go and I would actually just use a basic ADSR here. Okay, and then what I would do is I would go in and I would bring both of these in very slowly if I was like sustaining it. Oop, sorry. All right, bring that in slowly. Bring that in slowly. Nice slow attack. It's maybe too slow. Let's slow that down more. I want the sustain to be up much higher. Just to add a tiny bit of interest into the sound. Let's go down another octave. Oh, that's beautiful, hearing that come in. And there you have it. I mean, that's really how you work with the Phase 4. And if we need to, we can bring this. And again, one of the easy things that I would use the remote controls with, if I had like a blank page or something, add new page, would a lot of times just be to put this on something like shape and on mod. And that would probably be it for me. And that would give me enough sort of like variation on the sound. And I could go in here and see what we want to do. I might have had that balance just right already. Because I like to hear a little bit of that out of control wobble, but not too much. And what I think is really amazing about this and about this instrument is that we have no effects, okay? This is just what this instrument's doing. We haven't even started to use the filter. If we bring the filter in, we're actually able to use like our FM amount onto the frequency that we set. We'll try to just get a result for you. You can use a little bit there. There'll be a point that will hit and it will really make an impact. You can hear that. And I can't say this is a super usable sound, but this is what Bitwig Studio always encourages. This is what I like to do. So that's going to do it for this first part of the video. In the second part, which is just going to be after a brief little cut, we're going to talk about this instrument in kind of a broader context, if you will. So to wrap things up, we'll just talk about this instrument a little bit in context of, what else is on the market. So this is more or less like an FM, PM, PD type of synthesizer, of which there are a handful. Now, most of them kind of start by doing the exact same thing, just that idea of having one sound generator modulate another one or do that in some combination. Of all of the ones I've used before, though, this one's kind of the easiest to just jump in and actually work with. Whenever I use something like the Arturia DX7, and I think they have another one like that, I just go straight to the presets and I don't really mess around much more than that. At times, I might get in there and change a couple envelopes, but for the most part, it is what it is. And then I'm kind of using that instrument because of whatever effects processing they've put on, because that's what differentiates it. This is a great one to actually use, though. This is probably the most usable one. The other instrument that comes to mind right away is like FM8, FM7 from Native Instruments. And again, I'm not a big fan of like the actual FM part of it. It's kind of confusing. It's kind of a pain in the butt. The reason why I like that one so much is because it had some unique effects that you could use. And you couldn't really get those effects anywhere else. And so it added another dimension to that instrument. This one, you're starting out with a really beautiful, a really pure sound engine, a really beautiful, a really pure synthesis method. And then it's up to you to kind of add and build on top of that. So let's go in here. Let's maybe look at a preset. Just pull up this first one, see what it sounds like. It's a little loud. We can figure out what it's doing. So let's get rid of those remote controls. We have a few envelopes that have been added on here. And whenever you're curious as to like where things have gone, it's usually easiest to just go into the inspector and you can kind of see and you can adjust amounts from in there if you're ever confused. So yeah, that's kind of the way to do it. You can also right click on this stuff as well, or when you click it, you can see where it's actually going, which is useful when you're editing. This one also has CC1, which is the mod wheel. Let's see what that adds in. So that's tremolo rate. That must be tremolo depth. And this is the one, let's see, where is this one going? Wrong thing. Oh, it's going to the output. That makes sense. And there you hear your tremolo. Okay. And we can always go in here and adjust other settings and things like that. This one has some effects built onto it. Pretty straightforward. Let's just go in and maybe pull up one more random one. Road, what is this? Road to somewhere. Okay, this might be interesting. Very cool. Lots of stuff going on in here. See, we have an arpeggiator in there. very cool stuff going on. And it wouldn't take long for us to deconstruct this guy and sort of figure out how each of these components is making up this overall sound. So thank you guys for watching, and hopefully I'll have another video coming out soon. So take care until then.